I seen people lying in the parking lot, didn't know if they were dead or not, but they were just lying there from being shot. And there was vehicles with glass busted out everywhere, and they were still off in the store shooting.
Grim scenes in Arkansas tonight where 3 people are dead and nearly a dozen injured after authorities say a man opened fire at a grocery store. Police are now trying to piece together exactly what happened and why. I'm Morgan Chesky in for Gadi Schwartz, and this is Stay Tuned Now. And tonight we've learned the shooting broke out around 11:30 this morning in Fordyce, Arkansas at the Mad Butcher grocery store. That's about 40 minutes outside of Little Rock. We do have some video from the ground there, but a warning, what you're about to see is disturbing.
Oh my God, baby. There's somebody over the goddamn Mad Butcher parking lot shooting a goddamn shotgun.
Live here at Mad Butcher in Fordyce, and there's a shooting going on.
Store staff says the gunman shot through those windows. You can hear the gunshots, then went inside looking for even more potential victims. Police say the gunman was eventually shot by officers and injured before being taken into custody. And by the time the gunfire ended, authorities say 3 people had been killed. 10 others, including 2 police officers, were left wounded. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins us now. Sam, we know this scene incredibly fluid here. Where do things stand right now?
Sure, Morgan. I mean, obviously, that was very chilling video, what you just showed. A man standing there with a long gun, essentially stalking the parking lot, turning around and firing. Police have not yet confirmed that was actually the shooter. All the information that we have tonight, Morgan, is coming from Arkansas State Police. So here's what we got at about 11:30 this morning there in Fordyce. A man showed up with a gun and just started firing. You see the scene right there, heavy police presence. They said 11 civilians were shot. Of those, 3 of them, Morgan, died. Then you also have 2 police officers who were also injured but are expected to survive their injuries. And the suspect himself was also critically shot by police and is now in custody. He is also expected to survive. As far as who was impacted by this, we know that there was a 23-year-old victim, a nurse, according to the woman's parents, who was just out at the time on her day off going grocery shopping. She has a 10-month-old child. KARK, our local affiliate there in Little Rock, was able to interview them, and here's a portion of their conversation and how her parents are doing.
When I got here, I parked right there, and my best friend was standing right there, and I said, Christy, tell me my baby's okay. And she said, I can't. Just want my baby back. I can't see her. State police won't let me. They won't let me hold her. They won't let me say goodbye.
Morgan, we mentioned that she's a nurse. Those parents also said that they were tracking their daughter on an app on their phone. They saw her return to a hospital setting or a family clinic, and they assumed that she was going at the time to try to help victims, when in fact she had actually been shot herself and ultimately died. And we are now above 230 mass shootings for the year, and we're not even halfway through 2024.
Yeah, those numbers absolutely speak for themselves. Sam here, setting the scene. Fordyce, small community, somewhere I think around 3,000 people. We heard from those folks clearly impacted. What are we hearing from other people there as well?
Yeah, Morgan, it's a great question. And, you know, you and I have both covered so many of these kinds of mass shootings in small towns. You're right, it's 3,000 to 4,000 people there. They described it as everybody knows everyone. When the shooting broke out, folks were trying to help some of the victims. One of the interesting backstories to this that's going to need greater exploration is that those parents who spoke with our reporter also said that they know who the shooter is and that it was a neighbor of theirs, and they can't believe that he had the audacity and obviously the lack of humanity to commit something like this and upend families. The investigation at this point, no one has said anything about whether there's a personal connection with the criminal history or mental illness potentially may be of the person involved. But just to hear that within the confines of this conversation rocked the parents, rocked the community. We'll see where the investigation goes from here, Morgan.
Yeah, a heartbreaking detail there, Sam, and we know likely many more to come. Sam Brock, thank you so much. Not too long before that deadly shooting in Arkansas, a major gun case ruling from the Supreme Court, which essentially says gun rights are not unlimited. In an 8-1 decision in favor of the Biden administration, the court ruled domestic abusers can be denied guns, upholding a federal law that prohibits people under domestic violence restraining orders from owning guns. While Justice Clarence Thomas was the only dissenting voice, Chief Justice John Roberts emphasized his point, writing for the majority, quote, "Since the founding, our nation's firearm laws have included provisions preventing individuals who threaten physical harm to others from misusing firearms." With that, I want to bring in NBC News legal analyst Angela Senadella. Angela, walk us through this ruling. We know where things stand, but what stands out to you?
Hey there, Morgan. So we got to start a little backwards in 2022 when the High Court really expanded gun rights by declaring that any restriction to our right to bear arms, our Second Amendment right, is almost presumptively unconstitutional unless there is a historical analog. Now, what that meant is that all these lower courts then started hunting into our nation's history, going back to the 1700s, the 1800s, and really overturning gun laws that didn't have a direct historic analog. So that's what happened here. The Fifth Circuit actually overturned this domestic abuser restriction to guns law based on the early 1700s and 1800s, looking backwards and seeing that there were no abusers at that time by law, and as a result, there were no restrictions. Now, the Supreme Court, though, what they did today was really momentous and monumental and really reined that backwards by claiming that you don't need a direct historic analog. You don't need a historic twin. You just really need the historical spirit. And because in our country, from the beginning of its founding, and there Roberts even quoted back to 1686, there is a lot of precedent that people who are really dangerous can't have access to weapons. So that really broadened the idea, the statutes, and really broadened what Congress can do, and thus cleared up a lot of what the lower courts have been shooting down left and right.
Yeah, some good context there, Angela. We know back in 2022, the Supreme Court expanded gun rights, and just last week, the court rejected a ban on those bump stocks. Can you talk about those two rulings and how they tie in here?
Yeah, Morgan. So I know it seems like they're both very similar, but actually they're extremely different. So the bump stock ban was an issue that really had to do with the separation of powers. And there the High Court said that the executive branch only, so in that case, it was the Trump administration and his federal agency, can't just independently make a ruling that seems to go against what Congress intended. Now, at issue here is really a federal statute. So I think if we look at what that means moving forward, it's that, for example, the Biden administration, who has attempted to have more restrictions through a federal agency on gun laws, that they maybe can't do that they're going to face a lot of pushback. But alternatively, federal statutes, meaning what Congress might decide, they have a little more breathing room. It's not that they have to pass laws that have really been rooted again in the 1700s, but just in the spirit of our nation's Second Amendment, Morgan.
Understood. And given how conservative this current court is, Angela, what do these two rulings say about how the court, at least as of right now, views gun rights?
I think it's so interesting because I think after 2022, it almost seemed that people were looking at this court as really just unbridled. And it almost seems here that like the reins have been put on the horse, and it's a little clear that there is somewhat of a balance. Now, I don't think that this really means that they are necessarily going to be pro-gun restriction in the future at all. I think what they are trying to show is that this won't just be a conservative liberal race. It will actually be more of a battle. It'll be what our Supreme Court has been doing since the beginning of time, which is just wrestling with these issues at the highest level and continuing to ping pong back and forth to find what they believe is the best way to uphold our liberties, Morgan.
A true case-by-case situation. We'll be watching. Angela, thank you so much for breaking it all down. I want to go down to the latest on those wildfires that have been burning for days in New Mexico. It looks like rain and humidity finally giving firefighters the upper hand they need to secure that area and to start assessing the damage, which by the looks of it is extensive. Local officials say more than 23,000 acres of land, including tribal land, have already been scorched, and more than 1,000 homes and buildings are deemed total losses. So far, the fires have killed at least 2 people. But here's the thing about all of that rain. It also poses a very serious threat here. Wildfires leave the ground charred, making it hard to absorb any water and making it even more susceptible to flooding or mudslides. Meanwhile, federal aid is on the way after President Biden responded to the call for a disaster declaration. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson joins us now from New Mexico. Steve, we keep hearing these fires are 0% contained, and yet it seems because of the weather, firefighters may finally now have the upper hand. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's been raining for the better part of the day. The ground in most of the places that we've seen completely saturated. We have spoken to fire personnel. There are about 1,000 on the ground. They tell me they are gaining the upper hand, that this is helping. You have higher humidity, cooler temperatures, of course, the rain literally falling on the fire. All of that part of the firefighting effort and welcome. But yeah, you're right. It does get confusing, right? How could you still have 0% containment and firefighters saying that they're doing better? Well, you have to remember that containment, really, that number is just literally the perimeter which around they've created something sustainable so the fire can no longer travel in that direction. It's all it means. In this case, yes, firefighters may be getting the upper hand, but they're getting the upper hand on not one, but two fires, which if you total the size, will be 24,000 acres larger than the size of Manhattan. It is going to take some time before they can get a good reading on how much containment exactly that they have. But first of all, they have to put out the flames. They have to send the smoke in the right direction, and they have to make sure that they're doing that safely. In the meantime, still 8,000 people estimated evacuated from their homes. Here's what some of them are saying about this ordeal. Listen to this.
It's been nonstop planes, nonstop sirens. It almost felt like being in the middle of a war zone with all the smoke surrounding our little calm area right here. We've been here for 14 years, me, 15 for her, and this is definitely the worst that we've ever seen in the time that we've been here.
And the fire turning tragic, of course, with those two people dead as well. The disaster declaration will hopefully help with the sustainability of this area, not only with the local and state governments, but also the Indian tribes in this area as well. Morgan.
Yeah, Steve, thank you so much. And we know the damage and structure assessment have just started here. Do we know some of their initial findings?
Yeah, again, 1,400 structures believed to be not only damaged, but burned to the ground, with about 500 estimated of that number to be homes. Obviously, a lot of that work is going to happen when they're able to get a hold on the fires, when they get a higher containment number, when some of that fire actually burns out further away from the city centers here, which it still has not done. There is still smoke very much above people's homes. And so that's work that sort of has to be done at a later time. But some of the initial estimates are horrific. We've heard of whole swaths of neighborhoods that are gone. And we're talking about fairly small, intimate communities, right? They're not dealing with this level of devastation. So when you're talking about 1,400 homes to maybe a city center, that's not a whole lot. When you're talking about it here, that may be an entire community. So we're just starting to learn the level of devastation, but no matter what, we're hearing it can't be good. Morgan?
Yeah, heartbreaking scenes no matter the scope there. Steve, thank you so much. And now to a fifth straight day of just brutal temperatures. Nearly 90 million people still remain under some sort of heat precaution tonight. And we're seeing record high temps from the Midwest all the way to the Northeast. And this weekend, cities like Baltimore and Washington, D.C. could be in the triple digits. Now, Amtrak's warning people trains will even be slower due to these higher temperatures. And this all comes after commuters in New York's Penn Station were stuck on trains with no AC last night after a power outage. And as you know, storms seem to strike as the weather does get warmer. We're keeping a close eye on one that could become a tropical depression right off the coast of Florida and Georgia. NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns will have more on that in the forecast. But first, I want to go to NBC News correspondent George Solis in Philadelphia, where, George, it is still blazing hot.
Yeah, that's right, Morgan. It is Heat-adelphia, for lack of a better word. It has been a scorcher out here. The pool is now closed, but let me tell you, children out here and families certainly enjoying that cool dip while it was out here. Mr. Softy making a pretty buck selling those ice creams. But all kidding aside, obviously, when the city is under these heat advisories, these heat emergencies, they take it very seriously. Those cooling centers, so crucial and so important for those people that don't have access to AC. So they're putting in a lot of work. Of course, the reminder for everyone out here is to stay hydrated, find that shade, and wear those comfortable, cool layers, and to just listen to your body, because that is the first step in making sure you avoid things like heat exhaustion, heat stroke, or that deadly hypothermia. Officials here, of course, making sure that everyone stays safe and making sure people listen to their warnings as well. Take a listen.
We have to recognize that it is happening more often, which means that we have to prepare sooner. We have to make sure our pools are open, as early as possible. And when it's cold red, our facilities are ready to accommodate the people that need to be in a cooler place.
I got to tell you, a little bit of a breeze, which we're getting right now, makes such a huge difference. But the thing here to remember is that this heat, at least in the Northeast, has been brought on so quick. We barely had time to acclimate. And even after a few days of it, even though we are starting to feel like it's been going on, it is still very, very risky and very, very serious, which really increases that potential for any tragedy. And so far, though, we can happily report that there have been no fatalities as a result of this heat, but it is something that officials are always making sure they try to avoid, and which is why they ask those people to really pay attention to those signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke.
Yeah, plenty of people need to be taking those precautions, especially since Philadelphia could be breaking a temperature record here that hasn't been seen since the 1800s. George, I'm curious, this heat wave, of course, causing power issues, particularly with commuter trains like Amtrak, and with how prevalent they are in that area. What are you hearing from commuters?
I got to tell you, as my daughter has been recently saying, it is muy caliente out here. Those commuters very, very frustrated. I myself was impacted by those delays, and I got to tell you, they are hoping that all of this passes sooner rather than later, because once you start stacking up those delays, it just creates a chain reaction. Today, there were more delays coming out of Penn Station. Luckily, it does seem like it is starting to improve a little bit, but again, just a travel nightmare. We haven't seen any power outages yet. I did experience a brief one at my home, completely unrelated to the heat, but again, we just kind of have to start wondering if it's indicative of a bigger problem to come as these heat waves kind of persist a lot longer and these temperatures start to soar. Again, it's not just what the actual temperature is, as you know, it's those heat indices. When they start to wrap up into the triple digits, that's when you really start to get into those real risky territories. But so far, we're just hoping that the cooler temperatures are on the way, but that relief can't come soon enough, Morgan.
I can't even imagine. All right, George Solis, thank you so much. I'm going to turn now to NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, it has been a nonstop week here for the weather. How's the weekend looking here?
Morgan, they've been a very busy week between Alberto, the fires, we've had flooding, the heat wave, and it's going to continue into the weekend, and then everything's going to calm down a little bit as we go throughout next week. So the big headline has been the extreme heat, really from the West Coast to the East Coast. This heat dome's been kind of pushing around, and now it's going to settle over the Mid-Atlantic this weekend. Northern New England has finally cooled off, but now it's heating up in areas of Virginia, and the nation's capital will be one of the hottest spots on the East Coast all weekend long. Even at this hour, we still have many areas that are feeling like mid to upper 90s, all the way from the Ohio Valley to the East Coast. And it's only going to get worse as we go throughout the weekend. The lucky few have cooled off, and that's mostly going to be in areas of New England. But we've paid the price. Pretty strong thunderstorms have rolled through Hartford. We had a flash flood warning at one point. We've had some wind damage in the area, and now these storms are rolling through Rhode Island. So you have to, get these storms first to get into the cooler air behind them. And as far as tomorrow goes, record heat possible. We're going to be close to record in Columbus, Cincinnati, Chicago's going to be close to the record high. Look at Washington, D.C., near 100 degrees. The record is 101, so we'll be close. Same goes for you in Richmond. And then Sunday looks to be equally as hot, maybe even a chance of being even hotter from Richmond all the way to Washington, D.C., 99. And then it cools off a little bit, not a lot. We get down to about 93 and 93 as we go through Monday into Tuesday. Now, as far as the tropics go, we've been watching the last couple of days to see if this little area would spin up and become our latest tropical depression. That hasn't happened. It's still spinning. It's bringing rough surf and rough conditions right along the Florida-Georgia coastline. You see the spiraling bands of showers. It looks, almost like a tropical storm, but it really didn't have the punch or kick to it. Didn't get strong enough to be called one, but it has ruined beach days for a lot of people here, especially from Daytona Beach southwards. And this will be the case tomorrow, too. The real risk is going to be if we have, the rip currents out there. The red flags are up on many of the southeast beaches. And as far as other concerns, the flooding is definitely an issue in New Mexico, especially near where the Burn Scar fire is, near Ruidoso. And also, we have to be careful as we go throughout the rest of this weekend. A lot of severe weather possible into the Midwest, Morgan.
All right, Bill, thanks. I'm going to get now to some breaking news. We have a verdict in the state case against David DePape, the man who attacked Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi's husband with a hammer back in 2022. Less than an hour ago, DePape was found guilty in the state case against him. He's already been convicted on federal counts of attempted kidnapping, for which he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The state charges he was convicted of included attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, among others. Don't go anywhere. We're just getting started. Coming up next, a cyber attack upending operations at thousands of car dealerships nationwide. Sales staff forced to think outside the box in order to keep business rolling where the issue is being traced back to. Plus, starting from scratch. Leaders in Maryland trying to figure out the steps to rebuild Baltimore's Key Bridge. How their plan could end up being a blueprint for other major infrastructure projects. And later this hour, marking 55 years since the Stonewall uprising. Inside the brand new national monument, an important story it hopes to tell. Stick around.
I'm proud of where we've come, but I also realize the difficulty of the road we've traveled. I also think of the people who didn't make it.
And welcome back. Here's some of the other headlines we're following tonight. At a hearing in Florida, the federal judge in Donald Trump's federal classified documents case seemed a bit skeptical the case should be thrown out. That's what Trump's legal team is arguing for, because they allege the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutional. Today's hearing was the first of three, with the other set for Monday and Tuesday. For the first time, Donald Trump's campaign reported having more money than Joe Biden's by a margin of about $25 million. This comes as both presidential contenders rake in some big money donations. Former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg donated nearly $20 million to Biden, while reclusive billionaire Timothy Mellon provided a pro-Trump group with $50 million. In Key West, Florida, a Cleveland Browns player was arrested for a DUI after crashing an SUV into a restaurant. According to police, Lonnie Phelps refused to take a breath test and would not cooperate with officers. The police also said the building and car were significantly damaged, but thankfully no one was hurt. The Browns have since cut Phelps from the team. And in Boston, the Celtics celebrated their NBA championship win with a big parade through the city. More than 1 million people turned out, believe it or not. Players and coaches riding those duck boats. Oh, look at that scene. It was the franchise's 18th championship, the most of any NBA team, but Lakers fans, quick to remind you it's only Boston's second this century. Last night we had a chance to witness history in Major League Baseball. The Cardinals and Giants playing at Rickwood Field in Birmingham, Alabama. It is the oldest professional ballpark in the country and home for the Birmingham Black Barons of the Negro Leagues. Hall of Famer Reggie Jackson was on hand. He played in Birmingham in the 60s as a minor leaguer and reflected on what he endured.
Coming back here is not easy. The racism that I played here, when I played here, the difficulty of going through different places where we traveled. Fortunately, I had a manager and I had players on the team that helped me get through it. But I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Jackson played 114 games for the Birmingham A's before he was called up to the big leagues. He then proceeded to become a baseball icon with the Oakland A's and New York Yankees, earning his Mr. October moniker while winning a cool 5 World Series titles. Well, before screens dominated our lives, buying a new car was done the old-fashioned way. We're talking about pen, paper, maybe even a calculator. But now this week, dealerships nationwide are being forced to turn back the clock following a multi-day cyber attack. CDK Global, which provides software for thousands of dealerships here in the U.S. and Canada, says it was hitting back-to-back attacks Wednesday. In fact, those attacks still causing outages at some U.S. dealerships today as the company scrambles to reinstate services. With more on that, we welcome NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster, who has been following this pretty unique story here. Shaq, I know the attacks happened Wednesday and that 48 hours is not forever, but why has it taken so long for CDK to find a solution? And I'm curious, have they even determined a cause here?
You know, part of the problem here is that this was a multi-day attack. They say that initially happened actually on Tuesday when the first attack took place. And then the company said that they just shut down their systems out of an abundance of caution. But then things started to seemingly improve. And then Wednesday, they got attacked again. And now it's 3 days later. They're impacting thousands of dealerships across the country. And they're telling their customers that, and this is CDK rather, telling their customers to expect the shutdown to last several more days. So what was an initial attack and seemed to be out of an abundance of caution has now been several days later and no signs of when this attack or when services will be restored.
Now, we did talk a little bit about dealerships having to enter their sales manually here, a bit of a throwback, Shaq. So how prepared were they, if at all, for this big switch? And do we know to what extent sales have been impacted?
Let's start with sales, because we know many of the retailers are saying that they're still able to complete many of these auto sales. However, it is obviously slowing things down. And you mentioned what we're hearing from many of these retailers and dealers. You're hearing that they're resorting to sticky notes to keep track of things. They have spreadsheets in order to keep track of what they need to do once the system comes back up. And part of the issue here is that this system impacts so many different areas of dealers' operations, everything from storage to supplies, everything including stocking and scheduling for team members. I want you to listen to a little bit of what the owner of Celebrity Auto Company described in the chaos that this is creating.
It's a disaster. I have to tell you, customers are coming in, consumers are coming in. You know, we're selling cars, but we can't book the deals. We can't finance the deals. We can't get them to the banks.
Now, the National Automobile Dealers Association released this statement. We'll put it up on screen. They say dealers are committed to protecting their customer information and are actively seeking information from CDK to determine the nature and scope of the cyber incident so they can respond appropriately. We have reached out multiple times throughout the day to CDK Global. They have not returned our requests for comment, Morgan.
Buying a car via sticky note. Shaquille Brewster breaking it all down. Shaq, thanks so much.
You got it.
There is new drama tonight in the Rush shooting trial against Alec Baldwin. The New Mexico judge says armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed does not have to testify in his trial. Now, she was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter earlier this year, with the prosecution calling her an incredibly important witness against Baldwin. This news comes as the judge also denied an effort by Baldwin's team to dismiss the trial altogether. So with that, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin, who has the latest. Dana, let's first start with Baldwin and that failed effort to drop the case. What happened there?
Yeah, so what happened is they had to recess because they were having technical issues. That last motion to dismiss the case, essentially they said the FBI damaged evidence, that prop gun, because they tested it. They wanted to see if they could get it to misfire, so they had to hit it with the mallet, and that destroyed the gun. So that's the grounds that they hope to get this dismissal on. We were hoping to get an answer today. Court has gone 40 minutes over, and they were having audio issues. So we'll find out Monday. That's when the hearing will resume, and it will likely not be dismissed. There have been several attempts by the defense to dismiss these charges, and the judge has denied every single one.
People are going to have to wait. I want to turn now to armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. What, if any, chances there here that she will be taking the stand?
Not very likely. She has already said in those jailhouse phone calls that were released months ago that she is not interested in testifying for Baldwin's trial because he didn't show up for her. The prosecutor says she's still interested in calling Hannah to the stand, but the judge said, look, she's made it clear she doesn't want to cooperate, and I'm not going to hold her in contempt if she comes and asserts the fifth, which she did in these pretrial hearings, these pretrial interviews, so to speak. And so it's very clear that she doesn't want to be there. She may be pleading the fifth the entire time, but the judge says, hey, even if she does that, I'm not going to hold her in contempt because I don't want a mini trial within a trial, because usually when someone's told you got to show up to court, you can get jail time if you don't cooperate. But in this case, they're like, it's not worth it. Let's move on. So likely not to see her.
Likely won't see Hannah. We still don't know if we'll see Alec Baldwin or not. Yeah. So with that said, do we have any inkling of what kind of evidence the state may be bringing against him?
Yeah, so this is an involuntary manslaughter trial. We all know, and no one is saying that this was not an accident. This was an accidental shooting, but because someone died, he is being held responsible. The prosecutor says he pulled the trigger, although he asserts he never pulled the trigger. So they say they are going to present evidence that will show that he did, in fact, pull that trigger and that he was allegedly reckless and also horseplaying, quote, horseplaying while on set with firearms. So they plan to present additional video evidence and other witnesses that will corroborate the prosecutor's story. And of course, the defense is going to try to poke holes in that and try to put the onus on the armorer who has already been convicted in this case. So it'll definitely be a big watcher. He's expected to go to trial July 10th.
And we know that you will be watching every second of it. Dana Griffin, thanks so much for coming in here and breaking it all down for us. Thanks. Coming up, 27 years after We Got Next, the WNBA is stronger than ever. We're looking back at that very first game with one of the women who made it happen. Just how far the league has come. But first, you got to see this and you got to hear it too. Aren't fooling you. Taylor Swift got a royal welcome earlier today when the Royal Guard played her 2014 hit Shake It Off right in front of Buckingham Palace. This marks the first night of 3 sold-out shows at Wembley Stadium for Swift's European leg of the Eras Tour. After this weekend, though, Taylor won't be saying so long London. She returns back to Wembley for 5 more nights in August, giving fans anything but a cruel summer. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Here's some of the stories happening out west that we're following right now. Dwayne Davis, known as Keefe D, is looking to get out of jail. He's got a bail hearing set for next week, and he's expected to ask for a $750,000 bond to be released on house arrest. The ex-gang leader is accused of killing hip-hop star Tupac Shakur back in 1996, and he's facing trial in November where he's pleaded not guilty. Davis was arrested last year in connection to that murder. Homeowners in the LA area are finding hidden cameras on their own properties, and police say burglars are the ones actually putting them there. Authorities say it happened just this past week. A camera was found disguised as a bush where an attempted burglary was reported. Investigators say thieves utilized the cameras to gather info on homeowner routines to find optimal times to strike. A Nevada judge is dismissing the charges in the fake electors case there. The state court judge ruled today prosecutors chose the wrong venue to file the case, basically saying it was brought up in the wrong area. 6 Republicans are accused of submitting certificates falsely claiming Donald Trump won the 2020 presidential election. Nevada's attorney general says he's going to appeal right away, and the trial was supposed to be scheduled for next January. Want to turn now to a disturbing story out of Texas, renewing the debate over immigration. 2 undocumented migrants have been charged with murdering a young girl, adding to a string of high-profile crimes involving migrants. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez reports.
Tonight, 2 Venezuelan migrants are under arrest in Houston, charged with murdering 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungaray.
Please help away. My firstborn. I was a teen mom. She's who helped me grow, mature.
Immigration authorities say the suspects crossed the border illegally earlier this year and were released into the U.S. by the Border Patrol. Police say the men strangled Jocelyn and dumped her body in a creek. Her mother is devastated.
Nobody deserves to lose a child. No one deserves to bury their child. It's hard.
Just days ago, another undocumented immigrant from Ecuador was arrested in New York City, accused of raping a 13-year-old girl in broad daylight. And last week, an undocumented immigrant from El Salvador was arrested in Oklahoma. Police say he raped and murdered Rachel Morin, a mother of 5 from Maryland.
I just want to take this time to thank all of the law enforcement for all their hard work.
Former President Trump blames the Biden administration's border policies.
This monster should never have been allowed into our country, and if I was president, he would never have been able to come in.
Still, studies suggest immigrants are actually less likely to commit crimes than U.S.-born citizens. And an NBC News review of available 2024 crime data shows overall crime levels dropping in cities that have received the most migrants. The Biden campaign has repeatedly criticized the charged language Mr. Trump has used to describe undocumented immigrants.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
And the president has called out Republicans for tanking a bipartisan border funding bill earlier this year.
It's outrageous. Folks, I'm not interested in playing politics with border or immigration. I'm interested in fixing it.
Polls show immigration is a top issue for voters this election year, along with inflation and the economy. It's likely to be a major topic in next week's debate. Morgan?
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. In Baltimore tonight, officials are ready to replace the Francis Scott Key Bridge just 3 months after it collapsed. It's a project, though, that could cost billions and might just position Maryland as an infrastructure hub in the wake of that deadly collapse. CNBC's Scott Cohn breaks it down.
313 dispatch. The whole bridge just fell down.
From an unimaginable disaster comes the chance to reimagine a critical piece of American infrastructure.
This is going to be an important opportunity for our state to look at all of our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our tunnels. Our critical infrastructure is imperative for our economic growth and development.
The Port of Baltimore is reopened for business.
With the harbor now reopened, they're collecting proposals on how to rebuild the bridge, a key link not just for Baltimore, but for the whole eastern seaboard. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says the new bridge will be better than the old one that stood for 50 years.
We know things that we didn't know in the 1970s about how to put up a bridge. It does bring an opportunity and I would say a responsibility to get things right for the future.
A bridge that's not only sturdy, but sustainable in the face of climate change, all at a reasonable price.
Well, we need to get the right bang for the taxpayer buck.
Upwards of $2 billion taxpayer bucks, state officials say, with plans to rebuild the bridge in 4 years, record time. But in many ways, this is just a fast-motion version of what every state is dealing with. Not just roads, bridges, ports, and airports, but connectivity and utilities in the race to rebuild U.S. manufacturing.
I don't think the fix is going to be a short-term fix. I think it's going to be, 5+, 10+ years before we really get it to a point where we feel good about it.
As a result, infrastructure has become the most talked about thing in economic development circles. And Secretary Buttigieg says it's not too early to start thinking about the next big infrastructure bill after the $500 billion in new spending under this one is done. Scott Cohn, NBC News, Baltimore.
And welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world, shall we? Incredible scenes coming out of southern China, where historic downpours have caused ongoing floods and massive mudslides, killing nearly 50 people. Some cities have even reported as much as 14 inches of rain a day, and forecasts say the storms aren't over yet. An American tourist in Zambia has died from an elephant attack. It happened yesterday. The 64-year-old woman went on a safari. They stopped near a bridge to watch some elephants. Then one of them knocked the woman outside the vehicle before trampling her. This is now the second fatal elephant attack in Zambia this year. And extreme heat's being blamed for the death of hundreds of Muslims at the Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has not released a death toll as of yet, but a list leaked from a hospital shows the names of 550 deceased pilgrims. Though NBC News cannot independently verify those numbers, this week, temperatures in Saudi Arabia topped 115 degrees. And in Paris, it appears that historic Seine is still too polluted to host swimming events, which was the plan. That's why more than $1 billion was spent to clean it up. But officials say they're still confident the river will be ready in time. They have just over a month, as the Summer Games will begin on July 26th. Well, tonight things are getting more and more tense between Israel and the U.S. after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doubled down on his claims that the Biden administration is holding back sending weapons to Israel, something that the White House is currently denying. NBC News International correspondent Josh Letterman with that story.
Morgan, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is doubling down on his sharp critique of the Biden administration, really opening a rift with Israel's closest ally as he claims that U.S. supplies of weapons like ammunition to Israel has slowed down to a trickle. He says that he tried to address this in private with the Biden administration, but that it simply didn't work and that it was absolutely necessary that he actually raise this in public. Netanyahu making these comments in an interview interview with Punchbowl, a D.C. publication really in President Biden's backyard. And he says that Secretary Blinken has now promised to clear up this backlog and get the weapons flowing. But in the meantime, the White House insists they don't know what he's talking about. They say there's only one aid shipment of very large bombs that was put on hold, and that the U.S. has continued to supply Israel with what it needs to try to protect itself. This as Netanyahu was also facing public pressure and a growing dispute with his own military, as the chief military spokesman this week contradicted Prime Minister's claim about the key goal of this war to defeat Hamas. The military spokesman saying defeating Hamas is not possible, and that anyone who says that's going to happen is throwing sand in the eyes of the public. And there has been renewed fighting on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, where Hezbollah and Israel have been trading fire, once again raising fears about a potential second front in the war, as Israel's top diplomat today said the time is soon coming for a decision on how Israel will respond. Morgan.
All right, Josh, thank you. Before we go tonight, it's time for the future of everything. And if you have some extra cash or a lot of it, does Ferrari have the car for you? Coming up, how the iconic brand is putting their own spin on the electric vehicle. We get a sneak peek inside their secret Italian manufacturing plant. Coming up. Finally tonight, in the future of everything, luxury car company Ferrari is making a very big bet on electric vehicles. Today, it unveiled a brand new facility they're calling the E-Building, where the revered Italian brand will manufacture its very first electric car. Ferrari says it's planning to launch the new model sometime late next year, and it'll only cost you a cool $500,000. CNBC's wealth editor Robert Frank give us an exclusive look at this new breed of EV.
Ferrari unveiling its most advanced factory yet. They're calling it the E-Building, and this is where Ferrari will make its first ever all-electric vehicle. Now, that vehicle won't be launched until the end of 2025. So Ferrari will also be building traditional combustion engine cars here, as well as hybrid cars. Hybrids, by the way, now make up nearly half of Ferrari's production. But when I sat down with the company CEO, he said his strategy is all about quality over quantity, value over volume, so he is in no rush to rapidly expand production. He said, in fact, Ferraris should be hard to get since they are a true luxury product.
A luxury company is a company that is using, let's say, the technology, the innovation, the storytelling, the heritage, everything with the ultimate goal to feed that emotional side that we all have.
And Ferrari certainly trades as a stock like a luxury company. In fact, their multiple is now more than 50 times forward earnings. So that is a higher valuation than Hermes or even LVMH. In fact, the average Ferrari profit right now is about $126,000. So just for perspective, you would have to sell 16 BMWs or about 27 Teslas to get the same dollar profit as a single Ferrari. And even if they don't expand production, they are making more profit per car because they're more expensive. People are adding all kinds of customization and personalization, and the new models are more complex, more sophisticated, and more expensive. For instance, this car, the SF90XX, starts at $1 million. By the time you add in special things like this carbon wing and special colors like this yellow paint, you're talking perhaps up to $1.5 million. And that is why investors love this stock. The stock up over 20% just this year. Robert Frank, CNBC Business News.
It has been 55 years since the Stonewall uprising, which led to the modern LGBTQ rights movement that we know today. And now, just in time for Pride Month, there will soon be a new place where that history lives on. NBC News Now anchor Joe Fryer explains.
55 years ago, it was the scene of an uprising. Now, it's where that history is immortalized.
When I came in here and touched this wall, I had chills.
Mark Siegel was 18 years old when police raided a popular gay bar called the Stonewall Inn, sparking a riot that he says some falsely characterized as theatrical.
There was violence going on out that street. It wasn't theatrical.
What was it?
What was it? It was us finally fighting back. It was us saying we want to be treated equally.
It was a turning point in the battle for LGBTQ plus rights, a movement now chronicled here at the new Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center.
How are you feeling right now?
Incredibly excited.
It's half of the original Stonewall Inn, which is still open next door, though the two are separate entities. Across the street is a park that became a national monument in 2016, but didn't have a visitor center until Anne Marie Gothard and Diana Rodriguez took the lead. They raised funds, then convinced Siegel to curate panels about Stonewall's legacy.
Mark and so many like Mark are the reason we can do things like this. And I don't think the man's ever been truly given his credit. What you have here is a first-hand account of Stonewall.
For Mark,
do you feel proud?
Yes.
The emotions have not faded.
I'm proud of where we've come, but I also realize the difficulty of the road we've traveled. I also think of the people who didn't make it.
This is a tribute to them, a space that will open its doors next Friday, exactly 55 years after Stonewall changed the world. Joe Fryer, NBC News.
Progress that does not end there. Well, that does it for us tonight. I'm Morgan Chesky. We'll see you Monday, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.